Okay, you hear me? Okay. So, welcome to this last session. My name is Ingmar Lund. I work at the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority as a senior advisor. And at this last session 4 here, we will look forward and give the views where we are going and discuss future perspectives in radiation protection. And now we have had 2 days of discussion, and I think a lot has already been said of where we are heading and where we should go. But we will try to sum it up here. And with me here on the panel, I have, starting here from the left, first of all, Hans van Marke from Mål in the Research Center in SEK-CN, and he's also chair of ANSCA since 2017. And then we have Hans-Georg Menzel, ICAO chair, of course, and also a lot of experience from other users at CERN in Switzerland and Germany, ISPRA in Italy, and also been in the main commission in other areas. Then we have Ritva Bly from Finland, who is presently president of the Nordic Society for Radiation Protection, also chair of the Standard Committee for Radiation Guides and Standards at IAEA, the RASC. After that, we have Roger Coates, president of IRPA since May 2016. Long experience in radiation protection and in the industry area. And you also, as far as I remember, have an OBE since 2016 in recognition of your work in this area. Then we have Nicole Martinez, assistant professor, as far as I understood, from Clemson University in South Carolina. And as we know, as yesterday, also the Lindell Medal laureate. And she's interested in, or very much involved in environmental issues, both from anthropogenic and natural radiation. And then we have Claire Casson, ICRP chair since 2009, but also earlier good experience in vascular interventional radiologist and experience for the medical field. I should have said that's also Ritva's experience in the medical field. Sorry for not mentioning that. And last but not least, we have Edward Lasso, who is, as far as I understand, the deputy head of the Division of Radiation Protection and Human Aspects at NEA and OCD NEA. And I know Ted mostly since his long work with scientific secretary for the CRPPH committee. So without much further ado, we will try to divide it in the following way, that first every one of the panelists will be able to say for a few minutes what they think are the most important issues in the way forward. And then we will have some small discussions in between ourselves here on the panel, and then I will let in the questions from the audience. And then we will sum up. And my only sort of instructions, which I've said or given, is that we try to use the big brush and be concentrating on the sort of what we think are the most important broader factors in this area. And perhaps not go too much into the technical details. So we start with you, Hans, then. Please, the word is yours.
Okay, I prepared a few slides which order my presentation. So thank you very much for the opportunity of being here and of being also a member of the panel. And I would congratulate SSM for the excellent organization here, and ICRP and ICRU for picking out Stockholm and for celebrating the 19th anniversary. So first, one slide on UNSCARE. UNSCARE is a scientific committee, so we are not dealing with the radiation protection. We are a scientific committee reporting directly to the United Nations General Assembly, and our mandate is to assess levels and exposure of ionizing radiation on the one hand, and biological mechanisms and health effects on the other hand, for member states, scientific community, and the public, and there are some flyers available at the desk outside. So some reflections for this panel discussion, and I with limited time. So first, we already heard that the controversy about low doses, and personally, I find that controversy very unhelpful. And I see, on the one hand, the alarming message if you are using collective dose, so translating an individual risk with a low individual probability into a collective risk, and then calculate a theoretical number of victims. I think this is not a good way of dealing with the low dose, because it's based on simplistic and unproven assumptions. You use the dose as a surrogate for risk, and you're using the LNT hypothesis, and at very low doses, this is not been proven. On the other hand, there are other people having a reassurance message, no discernible increase in risk to be expected from epidemiological studies. And this is based in the low dose range on the intrinsic limitations of epidemiological studies, and not on scientific evidence of absence of health effects at low doses. You all know, and it has been shown by previous speakers, that epidemiology, low-dose epidemiology, is a very blunt instrument, and even our biggest study is not able to show statistical significant effects below 100 millisievert. Something else I find quite important is, for radiation protection, is that our dose is increasing. So since we found the existence of ionizing radiation by Röntgen and Becquerel in the end of the 1800s, we have been using ionizing radiation, and my estimation that in Belgium, I'm living in Belgium, that the average dose per year has doubled. So the reasons for this doubling is a bit increase in radon concentration, because our houses are better. They used to be very well ventilated in the 17th, 18th century. We have a small increase of cosmic radiation because we are using airplanes, winter sports. There is also a small contribution on average from man-made sources, but the big contribution to the collective dose is coming from the medical use of ionizing radiation. Third aspect is that we live longer. I'm very happy with that. In the years 1800, the average life expectancy was about 50 years. Now it's increased to about 80 years. So we doubled our yearly exposure, and we live longer, which means if you make the calculation, you see that in the years 1800, the average exposure over a lifetime was about 100 millisievert, and now it's increased to 300 to 400 millisievert on average. People who are sick get a lot of medical exposure. People who are living in radon-prone areas can get a lot of exposure. So there are quite a number of people above 1 sievert. So can you imagine to do an epidemiological study to show the effect of 20 millisievert if we all get, on average, 350 millisievert? So this shows you the problems of doing epidemiological studies of low doses. So this is a figure from an UNSCARE report. So at 1 sievert, the excess relative risk is about 0.5. It differs between the organs, but assume 0.5. If we assume linear threshold, we are at 5% per 100 millisievert. If we then take the attributability report, which Wolfgang has presented, of UNSCARE, you can find this figure. And if you put on this figure an excess relative risk of 5%, you see, astonishingly, for all cancers together, that you need 2 perfectly matched populations of 100,000 people each. And if you want statistically prove an excess relative risk of 5% at 100 millisievert. For specific cancers, it's even more. And this is assuming that there's no bias, no confounding factors, and I don't know of any epidemiological studies without bias and confounding factors. So this also sets an effective limit on the power of low-dose epidemiological studies. And you all know the reasons. We don't have a specific biomarker for radiation exposure. There's a long latency period between the exposure and the disease, and the high spontaneous incidence we have of the disease. And that's not only for cancer, it is for cardiovascular disease, it is for cataracts, congenital malformations, and so on. So how to bridge the gap between the transient short-term effects and disease. We already heard that current radiobiological analysis is very sensitive. If you give a dose of 1 millisievert, you can see double-strand breaks. You can see activation, deactivation of gene networks. But the problem is, was already indicated by Simon, that these effects are transient. So it's difficult to know their effect on the long term. So the significance for the late health effects for disease is not clear. And I think, and I plead here for more research in radiobiology, including animal studies, to clear out the basic mechanisms so that we are able to say something scientifically on the effects of low doses. Because I think with only epidemiological studies, we won't be able to bridge the gap on low doses. And then my last slide. Keep an eye on the progress of life science. There are a few million biologists doing research every day, not on radiation, but they are doing research. And I can say that as a physicist, I'm not a biologist, the way nature works is full of surprises. So life changes the environment to suit its needs. So it's not like in physics, you have an equation and you just solve it. No, it's actively searching for neutrons in the environment. It changes the environment. So the challenge will be to unravel the underlying mechanisms. And I'm sure that progress in life science will lead to unanticipated insights, and radiation protection people need to look what is happening in science, in life sciences all the time, because from there will come unanticipated insights and we need to follow them. So for radiobiology, bridge this gap between the transient short-term effects and disease, and for radioecology, from more descriptive research to really understanding what is happening, understanding the basic processes, the mechanistic models, develop mechanistic models. So thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Hans, really pointing out the difficulties in measuring the small effects and the limitation of epidemiology, and underlining the importance of understanding the mechanisms, which we might do perhaps by more radiobiology and other studies, and pointing to the life science. And so please, next then is Hans-Jürgen Wenzel, please.
Well, it's from one Hans to another Hans. Well, I'm Hans Wenzel, I'm from the ICIU. You remember that this event is a joint ICIU and ICRP event. Maybe that wasn't always present, but I think we heard some of the ICU talks. Well, I would like to start with a statement or with an observation, and that is, I think if you include radiation protection into the field of toxicology, then I think it is one of the most advanced of all fields of toxicology. We know quite a lot. We don't know things at the low energies, low doses so well as we would like to. But nevertheless, at the same time, our expertise is not really used that often or accepted that often. And if you take the example of the Fukushima accident, the ICRP got discredited, I think, officially by the government, whereas the ESR, I think it is called, another group of, well, you may call them experts as well, but I think you might as well call them mavericks, that they suddenly got more attention and were more believed than we, the experts. And it is just an issue of this, what we said this morning, the communication. The problem of communication. We need to really develop some more credibility, more acceptance. That is true for all fields of radiation protection. Of course, radiation protection is quite a diversified field. When people talk about it in the time after an accident, it's mainly the radiation protection of the people who are living in contaminated areas. But there was a time when it was a medical issue. Then it was a time when the ICRP 26 was published, and where they brought up the three important principles of justification, limitation, and optimization, that they had mainly the occupational exposure in mind. And then in medicine, we have making enormous progress in the technology, and so the request or the objectives of radiation protection in medicine have to adapt, try to keep pace with that. You heard the talk yesterday by Rock Mackie, how fast we have advanced in radiation therapy, and of course we must give guidance to the patient. The patient is not only there to be cured, but he also has to be protected from the radiation. He is also an object of radiation protection. All that, my next point is, actually you have taken most of my points, preempted me. One, of course, is continues to be the low dose issue. And as the other Hans has been saying, epidemiology will always have a limit, and we will never get the full answer. So the only chance we have that eventually we will have some biomarkers. I'm not sure if they exist, but we must continue research for that because that will be in a large frequency of cancers, generally speaking, to identify those which are radiation-induced. If we could do that, that would make an enormous progress. And finally, I think we should not sit back just and say, oh, we're happy with this and that, with our policy, with our concept. Very often these components of that go back a long time and are based from research in the 60s and 70s maybe. Take the example of the radiation quality. In radiation protection, it is accounted for by the radiation weighting factor, which is actually the quality factor in disguise. And the quality factor has been based on RBE measurements, mainly on single cell experiments back in the 1960s. And if you talk about radon, for example, where we automatically assume a W sub R of 20, that has a great impact. But maybe we should really look also into the radiation quality, not only for cell killing as it was at that time, but for that what is important for this is cancer induction. So what my plea here is, this research has to be continued. We mustn't believe that all that is done. We should continue. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, and for pointing out the importance of science and these issues. And we leave then to Ritva, please. The word is yours.
Good afternoon. So from Nordic perspective, I have 5 points on my list. First is that scientific research is really needed and further research is needed, but that was discussed so much already yesterday, and today I don't say anything else about that. The second point is communication. We have to improve this communication, and it's not only the content but also the ways how to do this. And I can see a role for societies and NGOs in this communication issue. We should develop messages that people can understand, and we should use all means for that. Sometimes you can use colors, sometimes pictures might help, but social media is one of the instruments that has not been used that much. So I think that is building up the trust. And then when we really need to have this communication is possibly emergency exposure situation, and then we should have these channels that we can use. In some countries, people trust more on societies and NGOs than authorities. So that's why I think the role of these societies and NGOs is very important. The third topic is about emergency exposure situations, and that we should keep in mind that radiation protection might not be the only issue, but the functioning of society is also very important. I mean, schools, hospitals, electricity, water, how it works. And that might be something that we should consider in future, that how to include this somehow even in the safety objective. So there is work to be done. Then fourth point is international cooperation. In our Nordic society, that is what we do all the time, because we consist of 5 countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. We have experience of more than 60 years for cooperating. And it doesn't mean always harmonization. It means also learning from each other and knowing how the other country, neighboring country, is functioning. And if there are some choices made there, why these choices are made. And I think that is important in international cooperation in the global community. And last but not least, the way how our society is working is organizing conferences every 4 years. And the next conference will be next year in Helsinki in Finland, 10th to 14th of June. And that will be the place where these famous Bulindel books translated in English will be published. And of course, Jack has volunteered to be there to introduce them. That was from the Nordic point of view, and just a few words from RASC point of view, because it has a link to these points. So the science is very important, and now in the next RASC meeting, we have a topical session with ICRP to understand the current scientific basis. And then the next RASC meeting will be with EPRESC. So possibly we will discuss about communication there. So these are touched also in the RASC.
So thank you very much. Then we are going from the Nordic Society to the International Radiation Protection Society. And Roger, please.
I am wearing a little microphone. Is it working? Excellent. Right, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks. ERPA is privileged to be invited to participate in this panel, so thank SSM greatly. The views I'll give will relate to the practice of radiation protection. That's ERPA's engagement. It will not cover science, and we've had a lot of science. The views will largely be based on a consultation exercise that ERPA had over the last 3 years on the system of protection. And that was published earlier this year, open access in the Journal of Radiological Protection, but it's also available from the ERPA website. So I hope you will have a look at what that document says. But picking some of the issues that come out of that, I think we all recognize that we have a system of protection which essentially hangs together, even if it is a little complex and a lot of fine print, and we've had this discussion earlier, but in broad terms, it works pretty well. There are some tweaks that could recommend in the document, but I'm not going to expand on those. I want to come to the practitioners. If we've got the system at one level, how does it look in practice? And the system then has to go through standards, regulations, but then in particular from my perspective through day-to-day regulation and frontline practitioners. And that's whether they're working in a hospital, a nuclear, or a university, or a wider industry environment. And there are some challenges to practice in ensuring that we always deliver good outcomes, and in particular, good outcomes for society. And in the next few minutes, I'd just like to look at some of the reasons why we feel this is and what could be done about it. The first point I think we need is to give more recognition to the overall context of our radiation world. I mean, we've heard plenty of times, and even in the panel so far, that there is natural background. 2 millisieverts a year is pretty well the absolute minimum, right? We all get 2 millisieverts. 2 to 4, but with a tail on going on that. And whenever we talk about a specific dose in our day-to-day practice, say 0.3 millisieverts, we have to keep remembering and putting it in context. It's not an isolated dose of 0.3 millisieverts or whatever it might be. It's moving somebody from 2 millisieverts to 2.3 millisieverts, or 3 millisieverts to 3.3 millisieverts. And within that wide variation of natural background, there's also the impact that each and every citizen of the world has in individual lifestyle decisions which give a delta to that dose, right? Whenever you change house, you are probably changing your radiation exposure from natural background. If you go on holiday to Cornwall in the UK, I've made this example earlier, terrific scenic area for a holiday, it's a high natural background. You will probably add 0.3 millisieverts or thereabouts. And of course, whenever we choose to fly. And if you add up these deltas, then typical deltas added up will be in the range 0.5 and above of millisieverts a year. So those deltas are a result of lifestyle choices by citizens with no knowledge, absolutely, or no concern over the radiation exposure, right? They probably don't know, but there is no concern or interest, and in my view, rightly so. So fact number one is that everybody gets 2 or 3 or whatever millisieverts a year. We all, through daily decisions, do plus or minus a delta on that. And if we, through our radiation protection world, add another millisievert or 2, we are not changing the overall nature of the radiation exposure of an individual. It's still a few millisieverts a year plus or minus a delta. And that's my version of low dose. It's a few millisieverts a year. And that's, I think, where all of the decisions are made. 95% of our radiation protection decisions are in the 1, 2 or less millisieverts a year. I'll come on a little later because clearly there are some exceptions to that at a higher level, and I'll come back to that. So having set that background, if that's the right word, I'd like to come to what the profession, and that's all of us in this room, what we can do. And basically, to me, it's moving towards more realism. And 3 things in particular. Someone today has already mentioned this conservatism and prudence. And that's one factor that somehow has slipped into our consciousness. As a profession, we want to be prudent, we want to be safe. But the point I'd like to make is what's prudent and safe at a few tens of millisieverts a year is not necessarily prudent at a few tens of microsieverts a year, right? Prudence has to be proportionate to the circumstances. And the classic example for me is the system of clearance of materials from our system of control. And I'm just using this as an example. In that system, there are a whole series of steps and judgments and values, and every single one of those steps and judgments has an element of conservatism. And what started out as a criterion of 10 microsieverts a year, the conservatisms are actually somewhere around 100. And I'll repeat that in case you misheard or misbelieved, about 100. What that system is delivering in practice for cleared material is doses to a very small number of people, not of 10 microsieverts a year, but of around 0.1 microsievert a year, to a very small number of people. And if I'm honest, that's not giving good value to society, and it's not making me feel proud of my profession. Nobody set out to introduce that factor of conservatism. We've sleepwalked into it. But I think as a profession, we have to wake up, right, and recognize that and think more consciously about it. The second area is reasonableness. We all know the acronym ALARA, right? And there's some great success stories, the nuclear power industry, occupational dosers and all that, terrific success stories, vitally important part of our system of protection. But there are growing concerns within the profession over, perhaps based on our success, that there is now an expectation of ever lower doses. And there's more emphasis on as low as, and much less emphasis on what is reasonable. And some hints of a move to minimizing doses, not optimizing doses. So I think we have to give more understanding and more attention to what do we mean as reasonable. The third example, and I'm not going to mention it in detail, is the importance of using a graded approach, particularly in regulation, right? That the regulation should be proportionate, or what is expected out of the regulation should be proportionate to the level of risk. So those are three things. So what does my future world of radiation protection look like? That when doses are around 1, 2, a few, however you want to phrase it, millisieverts a year, where they don't make a very significant impact overall on the radiation experience of an individual, then let's look to radiation protection culture. It's a little different to what Jack was talking about, a public culture. But in our organizations, in our hospitals, in our industries, right? If we have a good safety culture, and radiation protection is nothing different from all of the other things, right? It should be integrated into the overall picture, right? That if we have a good culture, we have leadership, we are engaging the interested parties, right? We are undertaking learning from experience. We are having good work procedures and quality assurance. That's all part of a good culture. And we don't, in my view, we don't need to do much more than that, right? Concentrate on a culture. Public exposures, yes, we have to go through the understanding, the empathy, all of the things that we talked about this morning, and Jack got on to, yes, radiation protection culture is a relevant part of it. But when doses are higher, and we're talking about several millisieverts and above, then that's where we have to focus our attention. And I've seen some absolutely terrific work in radiotherapy, some of the examples given this week. That is absolutely stunning. It's important. It's focusing the attention where it's needed. And I'd like to take my hats off to those guys and say, I don't understand what you're doing. If you put an integral on a slide, I'm lost. But I do recognize the importance of it, and it is focusing on the things that seem to be important. So in summary, the challenge is to make the system work in practice, get the best benefits for society, focus on the higher doses, don't ignore the lower doses, but integrate them into normal life and be proportionate, and don't seek to chase out every last microsievert at great expense to society. I want to be proud of our profession.
Thank you, Roger. And I gave you a bit more time there because you mentioned millisieverts so many times that the dose rate might be too high otherwise. Now, in any case, thank you very much for that. That was a clear statement. So, Nicole, please, what is your...
Oh, good. I get to follow that. I don't have a lot that's new, but in the broad brushes, I think that looking forward is an integrated or holistic approach, radiation protection of humans and their environment at the same time, incorporating both chemical and radiological and lifestyle choices sometimes into our models of risk and how we manage risk. The new thing, I think, in terms of an integrated approach, I think that technology, as technology advances, nuclear security and cybersecurity are going to start pushing into radiation protection or overlapping with radiation protection. Even in the US now, safeguards and radiation protection are kind of starting to overlap with each other. So I think that's a new thing that we'll have on the horizon. And then the other broad brush I have is building relationships and improving the relationships that we already have. Building relationships improves trust. So if you're in a community with your stakeholders, before you can have trust with your stakeholders, you have to build a relationship with them. I think that's very important. I think it's also important to build relationships, as example by this panel, between the various professional organizations. So I think it's great too that IRPA is here, and it's nice to have a voice from the different organizations and keep those open lines of communication. As scientists or whoever we happen to be in radiation protection, I think it's important to have a unified voice, and that doesn't mean that we don't disagree. As Ted mentioned earlier, it's important to have disagreements in science, but I also think there's a difference between disagreeing and bickering, particularly in front of the public. And so I think that David's presentation earlier today gave a really good example of how you can disagree, but not bicker. Right, so you can still present something that you don't necessarily disagree with and still keep a positive relationship. I think that's going to be very important going forward. And of course, as we mentioned before, I think improving diversity and inclusivity is important as well.
Okay. Thank you. Please, go ahead.
Okay. One of the disadvantages of being on the end of the row is that you may get to the stage where you may have to start repeating things. So I will try not to repeat anything that's, or as little as possible that's gone before. I'd just like to sort of remind people of ICRP's strategic plan and strategic view for starters. We want to be able to maintain and improve our system of radiological protection. And obviously, that's what ICRP really is all about. The next thing we want to do is to broaden awareness. And we also want to increase engagement, be it with stakeholders and with the public. So if we just look really at about how to maintain and improve our system, that's why we have so many task groups that are working on so many different areas. And we've heard a lot about science. We're not going to come back to science, but I would remind you that we do have task groups looking at low dose and low dose rates, looking at detriment. And now we have a new task group that's going to look at the factors that govern individual response to radiation. So we do have an awful lot of this work. That's just, as I say, largely Committee 1 and some of Committee 3. All our committees have a lot of work that's going on that will, I hope, aim to improve and maintain our system. One thing that we also need to realise that we do need to keep an eye on continuously is medicine. We've just seen a pie chart that shows that half of the dose that you are actually getting now is at least due to medical radiation. And again, we have to keep up with the technology as it is advancing and make sure that ICRP, we almost in a way need to be ahead of the game, because as the technology is emerging, we then need to actually be up and actually making sure we're in a timely fashion producing recommendations that go with that. We've talked a lot this week about areas of medicine, but in particularly children. And I think we do need to be not forget that children are more sensitive, and I think Kimberly Applegate pointed out to us, they have a longer lifespan in which to develop problems and issues. So these are some of the areas that we'll be looking at going forward. We've heard from David today about the environment, and again, one of our main goals is to make sure that protection of the environment is all part of the system, integration and the holistic approach, which again, Nicole has just mentioned. And then part of our communication is, of course, the engagement with our stakeholders, and as we were saying, and with the public. And how we do that is, of course, important. We've used the words this week about simplification with clarification, and there is a long way to go in radiological protection system if we are actually going to improve matters in this direction. There's no clear and easy way to go about it, but again, in using social media, which someone else has mentioned, and finding new ways is one way that we are going to have to be able to work going forward. So, without giving a long lecture, with no disrespect to Roger, I'm actually not going to say too much more because I think we can say more when we actually have a more open discussion.
Thank you. I've got a
microphone.
I've got a really clever microphone. I feel like I'm an astronaut. Following Claire, I think also I'm obliged to say that my grandfather, my father's father was from Dubrovnik. My father's mother was from Ireland. My father was born in Canada. So I'm an American, and English is not my mother tongue. So I apologize for any confusion. What I'd like to highlight a little bit is some of the areas. I mean, I think the objective of this panel is what's the future of, among other things, where we should be going with the radiological protection system and framework. I think we talked about a new approach to the narrative, and for that I think we need more clarity. Things like what's the detriment, what's the risk, what's optimization. To say that I hate to suggest this, but in simple language, in constructive overall language, I think there's probably a need for more flexibility. We talked about harmonization of the framework of the use, but different answers to different questions always arise. And Roger talked about optimization and doing that correctly, but I think that all depends upon the circumstances. And so that will manage things. I hope are you okay? There's flexibility that needs to be in terms of the prevailing circumstances. I hate to say that. The acceptability of solutions, endpoints is going to be different from place to place. Stakeholder involvement and optimization are going to be different from place to place. So all that needs to be addressed in a flexible fashion in the system in some fashion. I think there are still some scientific questions. Is acute radiation the same as chronic radiation? I think that'll have a big effect on the way things go. And I think we should turn to the chemical toxicology organizations to look at the adverse outcome pathways approach to see if that helps us to identify, among other things, maybe some biomarkers in terms of key events. So in terms of just to close this out, in terms of the narrative, I think if when addressing a particular circumstance, one needs to identify what risk is being considered, what situation causes the risk, and that's, when I say situation, I mean the big picture. It can be social, economic, scientific, all sorts of aspects. What aspects of the situation should be considered when managing the risk? So how far do you have to go when considering economic and social factors being taken into account? What aspects of that are relevant in the context of identifying and agreeing on the way forward? What's the best choice under the prevailing circumstances? And what are the key aspects of the situation-specific radiation protection culture? Because Jacques talked about radiation protection culture. I think that's essential, but it'll be slightly different in an operating power plant, or in a city affected by a large-scale contamination, or in a medical operating room. Safety culture is going to be specific, and all that, it's the same safety culture, so to speak, but it'll be in detail a little bit different from situation to situation. So from my view, the situation drives everything. So I hope that's a way we can consider things in the future.
So thank you very much. So I think you have mentioned already, as already Claire pointed out, several things which are common. And I say that the ARPA system is somewhat like a big boat or ferry. It's perhaps risky to making too quick turns. So I think we pointed out here that what we are aiming at least in the near future, is perhaps not small just changes, but realistic changes which are in line. But I think all of what you have said has been realistic, in the sense that there is nothing which points to a sort of quick change of the system, but rather improvements and betterings. So I think we start out by you having the possibility to give impressions of what you have said, each other here in the panel, and then if there is not too much from that, we open up for the public. So please, one-on-one. Please.
Throughout this meeting, the topic of communication, understanding, whatever, has come up consistently, and it has done in every single meeting I've been to on radiation protection over the last 10 years. I think Chris, perhaps yesterday or this morning, made the valid point that 99% of the general population are not remotely interested in radiation for 99% of the time. And therefore, a focus should not be general sort of broad education, right, across the whole population. But I think, the idea of the schools bringing in radiation along with other risks and how to deal with it is a valid component, and several societies are engaged in that, and it's a valid thing to do. But we also recognize that suddenly, when various circumstances arise, whether it's an accident, whether it's a proposal for a waste repository or whatever, or a hospital visit, there are situations where members of the public do suddenly become interested in radiation. And not many of us in our profession, and certainly myself, we are not comfortable in having the confidence that we have the knowledge and the skills to deal with that. And therefore, I think there's more that we can do, and ERPA is trying to do this, right? That there's more that we can do to get us as a profession, as individuals within the profession, more comfortable in engaging. Right? It's not just sitting and telling the risks of radiation, right? We've all heard that. It's trying, well, in different situations, it might be trying to establish that empathy. What is it? How can I help? Right? But many of the practitioners around the world are very, very nervous about engaging. So one of the things is to make ourselves more comfortable, not necessarily in what to say, but how to say it and how to engage. So that's something I think is important for all of us.
Can I just comment on that?
Please.
I mean, I know what you're saying there, Roger, but I think to say that 99% of them aren't actually interested, I think that may apply for a lot of the time. But I don't think that stops us having information out there that the public can then actually dip into when they want to.
Absolutely.
There may come a time when they need to come and see me to have their aortic aneurysm fixed, and they might have a slight interest in how much radiation they're getting. Or there might be the odd one that wants to go to Cornwall for 3 weeks and might actually want to know what doses they're going to receive. So I think it is up to us to make information available in a clearly understandable way, accepting I agree that for a lot of the time, a lot of the people may not want to go there. But I think it's still, we have that responsibility.
Agree fully, absolutely fully, yeah.
think we had Ted and then Ritva.
I guess I was just going to say that one approach to that, because Nicola's enlightened me that at Clemson University there is training in public speaking or at least the students are asked to speak and to give presentations. I think when I was going to school, which was a long time ago, there was no real focus on being able to say things well, I guess I'll say English. We use Sieverts and verbiage that people don't have a clue about. So if we could be trained at the university level in public speaking in some fashion, that would allow us to talk to our neighbors, or to talk to people in the street, or when you meet somebody at a party. What do? I manage Sieverts and Becquerels, and I don't know what those actually are. So that sort of thing, I think, would be very useful for people at education for us.
I think people are not interested in radiation protection because they don't understand how radiation is utilized in everyday life, how the ships are more safe because of industrial radiography and so on. So we could have small stories to tell to the people that it's normal life to have radiation.
Well, a bit along the same lines, I think we're always talking about risk, but of course there are beneficial use, and we should really, relative to the risk, we could do that. It is most obvious in medicine, where you irradiate persons intentionally for diagnostic or therapeutic purposes, and of course it is expected that there is a benefit to the patient, and therefore at the same time he has this radiation risk, but you have to really look at it both. And you already gave the example of industrial radiography. I would even say one could include in the discussion nuclear energy. Obviously there's a radiation protection issue, but there's also an issue with regard to energy provision and environment. So we really should look much more in a comprehensive way at these things, not isolate radiation protection in the way we usually do it, risk and only risk from radiation.
Yeah.
I think one issue here, we talked about radiation protection is in principle for me no science in itself. It's protection where we apply different sciences and knowledge from other areas. And one important thing is, of course, the feedback and the experience when people are really using it in practice. And I think that's something we should underline. I don't know, well, obviously I know that some of you have brought it up, but do you think there will be any change or any more outreach in this way, not only talking to the broader public, but also talking to the people implementing all the regulations and all the, our guidance, as compared to before, of course. I mean, since we are looking forward, is our system working in this way that we are really collecting the experience in improving? I know, Ted, please.
You know, I think as an analogy to that, I think one of the things we need to do is listen to the stakeholders, all of them. There was a comedy show where this daughter was yelling at her father, and she said, "You never understand anything I say." And the father's response was, "What the hell's that supposed to mean?" So I think we need to listen. I think we need to listen correctly to make sure that we're addressing the questions that the stakeholders, the minister, the governor, the mayor, the public, the NGOs, the industrial folks, listen to what they have and try and address those.
Earlier today and also yesterday, I think people pointed on the issue of that experience is also driving. It's not only value judgments and science, but also experience in the practical use. So do you have any more comments on what you have been saying here? Should we open up for the... I think then we open up for questions from the public. Now, please take the opportunity here to influence the future.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Kimberly Applegate from ICRP Committee 3 Chair, and I wanted to comment on the discussion about interest in radiation. As a pediatric practitioner, I want to augment what Claire said, and I think that every day we have to balance the risk-benefit, I like to say benefit-risk, in what we do, and so we have to balance how many family members can be in the room in a fluoroscopic procedure and be exposed with their child. we always ensure that the mother or family member is not pregnant before they're in the room. We make sure that the nurse that comes down with the baby from the neonatal intensive care unit is not pregnant. We have a lot of considerations every day about risk. And so we're always thinking about the ethics and the balance of what we're doing and making sure that there's a minimum exposure for everyone, because, why add, radiation to anyone if they don't need it? And so we're always careful. And I do think that both we have a duty, an obligation to be transparent about benefit risk and about like anybody who is given a procedure, a surgery, there's a consent, so to speak. The Image Gently campaign, if you're not familiar with it, I urge you to Google it. We have provided all stakeholder education information for free, and we have engaged with the public and other organizations to help guide how to do that communication, because we believe in it. We must educate. We must help people make those communications so that the parents of the children understand why we do what we do, and that the risk is low if there is a risk at the diagnostic ionizing radiation test level, and that we will provide further information if they want it. We do not want the communication to be scary. And when we started this campaign and launched our first module about CAT scanning in children, it was January of 2008, so it was a long time ago. And we have continued as a voluntary campaign with over 100 alliance organizations in medicine and dental and regulatory bodies, including IAEA and others. And I just want to really push that we continue to educate all stakeholders. And it can happen. It's really scary sometimes, and the message doesn't always get heard. The news media, the press, doesn't always get the message that we convey to them, or they may want to make it a scary story instead of an education or outreach story. Like in the New York Times, we reached out many times to them when they provided the negative stories, and they did not print what we told them. But on the other hand, I think we have a duty to keep doing this and to do it worldwide. And so I think that this is something I'm very proud of, and I think we have a template to continue to do this sort of work and to keep everyone involved. Thank you.
Ingmar, may I make just a comment? Because I think
Yeah,
that's,
please.
I think that's really excellent, but I think one issue we're going to have is informed consent in terms of veterinary aspects. Getting informed consent from the animals is going to be a challenge.
Please.
Well, I think in this context, I would like to remind you of probably the most important principle in the ICRP recommendations. Every exposure has to be connected to do more good than harm. And it is certainly very important to make this clear. Where is the good and where is the harm? And always to show that by exposures you have more good than harm. In order to do this, we need a better knowledge. And then I would like to remind you on a very old statement of philosophers. I know that I know nothing, which certainly also went through the whole discussion, or to many discussions which we had during these days. Nevertheless, people have the impetus to know more and to know better. And therefore, we certainly have to go forward on these two principles.
I think that's very wisely said. I think it's not only about the size of doses and if they're small, but also if they're justified. I think that's so higher doses could be justified and smaller doses could be less justified. So we have to look at that axis as well. Please, thank you. Yes.
Miles Goldstick from the Swedish Environmental Movement's Nuclear Waste Secretariat. I'm very happy to have this opportunity. I'm glad that I'm here. It was very nice to hear of the interest involving stakeholders. I feel that in that sense, the ball is in your court. I'm here, I believe, as the only environmental NGO present, and that's just because I live nearby. And there's certainly no hindrance to arranging for more participation. I don't know if you're expecting environmental NGOs or other stakeholders to be knocking at your door, please let me in, but I don't think that's going to work. I think you have to take the initiative yourselves and see to it that people come. I have some comments that I'd like to make, and if the panel wants to comment, that's fine. First one is regarding Alera. I've been waiting, and finally it got mentioned at the very end. The as low as reasonably achievable aspect. And maybe to many people it's self-evident here and it doesn't need to be mentioned. But I think it very sorely needs to be updated from many respects regarding accidents and particularly regarding compensation. Esteemed doctor here mentioned earlier the case of radon in homes and radon from uranium mines. And I want to point out that since 1990, there has been an act in the United States called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And perhaps the esteemed professor is aware of that. But the US government has been compensating uranium mine and mill workers and transport workers for their health effects since 1990, and that's ongoing and been expanding. Perhaps the most significant comment I have, the greatest aspect that I take home from this conference is that there seems to be a very deep, poor understanding of how the RCRP is being used in the energy policy debate. Now, maybe some of you are aware or more or less aware, but I think there's a very, very big problem with treating radiation as a homogeneous phenomenon. And I remember very well after the Fukushima accident here, there was the Radiation Safety Authority, SSM from Sweden, sent a person over and they were interviewed by the national radio when they came back. And the person said, oh, I got more radiation flying in the airplane than I did when I got walking around the Fukushima area. And this is a huge problem that totally lowers the credibility of radiation protection community, because obviously these are two very different things. You can't compare a nuclear accident to a personal individual choice to flying in an airplane. Of course, you can compare as a physicist to some estimation of dose, but in terms of the environmental effect and so on, it's absurd. And so unless you can stop presenting radiation effects in a homogeneous manner, I can't see how you can overcome this barrier of poor credibility. I think that there's a real need to stop justifying the nuclear industry. And if you don't believe you're doing that, then there's a problem with being oblivious. Because I've heard so many times here when my private discussions, people are always bringing up, oh, we need nuclear power because of climate effect, oh, we need nuclear power because of coal. And these are people who are highly competent radiation protection professionals. And it seems like they're not, some people here are just not aware of how you're being used as pawns, that the nuclear industry is presenting the IRCP guidelines as a justification for this extreme pollution. And we have a group of scientists in Sweden that say that nuclear power does not belong in a civilized society. And I think the ICRP has to address that directly and take a position. Dig into it. Don't let yourself be used as pawns. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Anyone who wants to comment on this? I can comment on the safe that the justification of many sources of radiation, also nuclear, is of course broader than only for the Radiation Protection Society. So I guess it involves other issues, but radiation protection is one, of course, but still. Otherwise,
I guess I would say that as was said earlier, radiation is everywhere, and each case is specific. And the circumstances, I believe, drive the concerns and drive the solutions to address the concerns. In that context, I think what we're trying to do, at least what my organization is trying to do, is to provide the facts as we understand the science, which is flexible and under discussion, so that people can make decisions about what they do. In terms of justifying whatever, in general, I don't mean to be flip, but governments do that, not ICRP.
Yeah. Absolutely, yes. I'd like to second that. I mean, quite a bit of what you mentioned there is actually not actually ICRP's business. I'm not sure I quite understood where you said about ALARA. You thought we should revise ALARA, or maybe I just didn't quite understand what you were trying to ask us about ALARA. I know Roger mentioned, I don't know if you want to comment too on this, but you mentioned about different emphasis on the different bits of or words in ALARA, but I don't think I quite understood what you were trying. Because you then talked about compensation and uranium mining. So
right,
I maybe wasn't following what you were asking there.
Well,
or maybe just commenting. I don't know.
I understand that it's difficult in a short time. Let me just give a concrete example. Here in Sweden, we've had a review by the court system called the Environmental Court of a proposal by the nuclear industry to store nuclear waste. And it's a subject that's been discussed quite a bit in Sweden and internationally, of course. And there were 5 weeks of hearings, formal court hearings, and the ICRP guidelines came up during that hearing. And the proponent, the company representing the nuclear companies in Sweden, they used the ICRP guidelines to say that they are proposing a safe method, a safe procedure. And there was nobody present in the court hearings to give any analysis, any criticism. SSM simply stated that, yes, we apply the ICRP guidelines. Okay, then this radiation issue for the nuclear waste problem is acceptable. It came up in the discussion that the ALARA principle was applied, that both SSM and the proponent were saying, well, we're applying levels that are as low as reasonably achievable. Yeah. But are they modern? When you have a situation where you take in different aspects than you did when this principle was first developed, like nowadays, there's much more knowledge than there was before. I mean, when this principle first came, I'm not sure when exactly the influence of DNA first became to be in the picture on radiation, but was that part of the as low as reasonably achievable concept? I mean, here we've got DNA being influenced and perhaps all future generations. And okay, you may be thinking that I'm totally off, but what I'm saying is that the long-term implications and the new science has to be incorporated into it. And compensation is one of them. When you accept that there is a cost, and ALARA includes a cost, doesn't it? And a cost is compensation. That's the connection I was making.
Okay. ICRP and the use of ALARA, it is just a tool for us to actually promote optimization. ICRP does not use the word safe, and the use of ALARA has never had any intention to be related to DNA. So I'm not sure about the train of thought there with regard to ICRP's guidelines at all. It doesn't really quite join up. Jack, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to answer to your good question, your good point about we are treating exposures all the same. 1 millisievert is 1 millisievert. If it is cosmic radiation or if it is impact of releases of nuclear power plant or a medical examination. But as mentioned by Ted, I think we do care about the situation. And I fully agree with you. When someone is concerned about a situation like a post-accident situation, and the first message that is given to this person is, don't worry, it's like smoking 10 cigarettes or flying to Europe, I think it's a shame. It's a shame. I think dignity is part of the ethical issues that are founding our system. I think from practical experience, we know that we are first, when we deal with people, we are first to listen to them and to listen to their concern and understand why they have this concern, to adapt the response to respond to these concerns. But the experience shows that when people have made this process of understanding what is at stake, what they can do to protect themselves, and they start to understand in which situation they are, you cannot prevent them to put the things into perspective and to say, oh, okay, they need some sort of benchmark. And there is a benchmark, which is the natural background. There are other benchmarks than flying to a transatlantic flight. There are many benchmarks that help people to put things in perspective. But I can assure you, in Fukushima, like in Belarus, even if the residual dose is 0.1 millisievert or even less, people continue to think that this is not a legitimate situation. And this is what we have to understand also. This is not anymore a matter of risk for them. It is a matter of being in a situation where they think it was really unfair. And this is something that we have fully in mind when we are now developing our recommendations.
So thank you. Please also.
Yes, I will mainly make a comment, not on this, but on another issue. And I will do a disclaimer first, because sometimes when I make comments, they may sound a bit critical. But rest assured, we are not critical to the radiological protection system at all. In fact, as a regulator, we are depending on the work of ICRU and ICRP. Otherwise, we wouldn't have anything to regulate. But actually, yesterday when Claire made the presentation about the work of ICRP, I got the hiccups, because lo and behold, ICRP are embarking on revision of the recommendations. And as a regulator, we just emerged from this process of implementing the European BSS and the international BSS. So I'm just saying that we are very grateful for all the work, and I'm very happy then, Claire, that on your next slide you said the system is robust, so you won't sort of turn the world upside down, and that is just a remark. We know there are plenty of challenges, and you will fine-tune the system, and I think it's timely for the 2028 to have a new recommendation, but maybe not that large changes. Thank you.
Yes, that is the intention, as you say. It is not to come up with dramatic change at all. Of course, a lot of science even has changed, and we have new emerging science, even in the last 20 years since the review process began before. And we just have to keep looking at that. We are looking to fine-tune, as you say, not to completely rewrite and with dramatic changes, no. And as I said yesterday, the sort of the time aim is purely a sort of a personal, it would be very good if it could happen by then, but if time is not right, then it will not happen in 2028.
Please, Hans. I give Hans a last comment, and then I think we have to wrap up.
I just would like that I completely support what Asa said, because what I see in Belgium, I'm not speaking as Unscare, but as someone who is teaching to students the radiation protection system, our legislation is cluttered with all the history of the radiation protection system. And you see that in the European BSS, they are speaking over practices, interventions. The only thing they do is change the definition so that it's no planned and existing exposed situation, but you still see the same words. In our Belgian legislation, they do not plan to change work activities. There will be still work activities exposed to nature, but they just change the definition of work activities so that this a planned exposure situation according to the European BSS, an existing exposure situation according to the ICRP. So be careful with changes, because we already have such a difficult legislation due to all these changes that you need to be careful that we can follow what you're proposing. We are not starting from scratch. We already have such a pile of legislations, and changing a small thing can be a lot of work for the regulators.
Very last word, Ted.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think when the new BSS, the new ICRP recommendations began, one of the first things that Roger Clark said was, "This is evolution, not revolution." And things changed a lot. So I would be a little cautious about what's going to change or what's not going to change. It may well be I mean, science changes, it has to. So it should be a slow, gradual change, but I suspect change is inevitable.
That's life and evolution.
Yeah.
Things do change, yes.
So thank you very much. And I think you should start by giving the panel an applause. And you could give yourself another one if you want to, but I just shortly summarize, and what I think is important to say is that if we start from research, where we should perhaps start, is that we don't expect perhaps marvels from epidemiology or biomarkers and so on, but it's important to continue with epidemiology and also to, as we heard Hans van Marke said, to look at the molecular studies and other types of research so that we can understand processes behind and learn from that, and the life sciences. And also, as Hans van Marke said, that it's still important to look at the old RBE values and things like that, and measurements and so on. So there are things to do, except basic research. We should go back and see what we are basing our present calculations. I presume the alpha, the value of alpha particles is interesting, for instance, in the radon sector. When it comes to communication or telling what we know, I think it's said by several that radiation protection has no value in itself. It only has a value when it's integrated into society with the rest of the activities. And also then, of course, that implies that we have to communicate, we have to be able to explain, and we also should perhaps not tell people how to do the judgments and valuations, but we should empower them, I heard, and we should inform them. Sometimes I think we can tell also. I think a researcher has a duty to himself to tell what we know and what we don't know. Equally important, both of them. But not perhaps extrapolate too much outside. And we should perhaps not say that we never will know. So it's a personal view. I think also when it comes to the future, it's extremely important with the experience feedback. And here we heard both from NFS and International, the IRPA, and I presume also that is exactly what is done by ICRP with all their communication and all their work groups, and also sending out all their publications for comments. We have to have the experience from those who are using it, but it's a bit worrying, though, that the process from having new recommendations until implementing them, I'm not sure I agree with also, I said we have just implemented. In fact, they're never implemented before they are used in the practical life outside. And it's their experience we need, not the, well, it's good to have the experience of the authorities as well, but there is another step then afterwards. And that is very important to collect that, because radiation protection is not a science in itself, it's a protection. I think I stopped with those 3 points, and you have mentioned much more, and I think also with the technical drive, importance for us in the medical exposures, but I think we've said that several times, so I think I stop summarizing that, because usually, at least I don't remember more than 3 things at the time, so I make it. Thank you very much for taking part in this session. Thank you.
Yes, if Claire and Hans would like to stay on the podium, we will have a concluding remarks by ICRU, Hans Menzel and Claire Cousins. Yes. So please, Hans, if the floor is yours.
Well, I think the concluding remarks have been done as far as the science and the radiation protection is concerned, so all it remains to me to say thank you very, very much for all this week, for support of SSM, for organizing this, I think, excellent colloquium, and I think everybody will go back with and have learned something. I should say perhaps a word about ICRU and ICRP. It is by chance that the two of us sit so far apart. We're actually quite closer than that. And
Okay.
And anyway, thank you again, both SSM and Åsa and Frederick. I think you did a very great job in organizing this and got a lot of people here, which I was very pleasantly surprised to see here. Thank you very much.
Okay, on behalf of ICRP, I can really only echo what Hans is actually saying. SSM have done a fantastic job in the organisation. We've had a very stimulating programme and an equally stimulating rounds of discussion in all the sessions. So I think the speakers have done a fantastic job too. And the fact that the audience have really been so participating has also made it, I think, a big success in addition. So thank you very much indeed.
So thank you both for being here, for letting your organizations start their work here in Stockholm 90 years ago. That is really appreciated, because that is actually the basis why we are here. I would like to say some words as well, and you have touched upon it. I think we should give a great hand to Åsa, Carolina, and Håkan, and Helene down there. Without whom this would never have happened. I'm really fond of creating new ideas, and this was one idea that came to me 2 years ago, and then I handed it over to Åsa and said, please make it happen, and she did. So now they are afraid of my next idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would also say that for being not a scientist, not a physicist, rather a constructing engineer and army officer, I have learned a lot. I continue to learn still after 10 years in this business. When I came here, I tend to hate Becquerel and love Sievert, not because they are Swedish, but Sievert are Swedish, but you measure Becquerels in terabecquerels and Sieverts in millisieverts. And maybe just there you have a problem with public engagement. Oh, it's terabecquerel, but it's millisieverts. Tend to be a bit confusing for someone coming in. I should also say to my teacher in physics at college, yes, I'm working with this, and you don't have to emigrate from Sweden. That is a risk if she ever sees this. To conclude and to say, once again, thank you for the ICRP, ICRU. This have been a dream, and it became true much better than I have expected. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. I want to say one more thing. And maybe because I always like the last word, I would just like to say one more thing after Frederick. This has been such a triumph at 90 years. we jolly hope you can repeat it and maybe go even better when we get to be 100. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you. Very good.